Alrighty, this thing on? Cool. All right, well, this is my first Solana conference, so thanks for the opportunity to come and speak. I'm Patrick. I started a company a few months ago called Commonware. We're building a library of MIT Apache 2 primitives for product-driven blockchains. That's a mouthful. Yeah, as mentioned before, I was the head of engineering at Avalabs for the last 3.5 years, and then before that was worked on crypto engineering at Coinbase. So, why am I here? Well, as we all know, like a few weeks ago, Anatoly and Max released a blog detailing some more specific ideas around how to, basically the importance of having multi-concurrent proposers. And I'm not gonna, I think they do a much better job of presenting it, and there was a presentation earlier today that covered some of this. But in the long and short of it, if you want to be a decentralized exchange or market, you need to run auctions. And if you prioritize cancels, you need a way for participants to be able to get transactions in that take advantage of that order prioritization. Because blockchains are inherently batched, as they've talked about, you need some way to protect the market makers who are proposing transactions from this delta between batches where they can get their, in one way, their face ripped off, I guess, by people that are MEVing them. Now, this problem statement proposed, by them, and then a solution, which is multi-leader protection, is the idea that if you have a number of validators that are concurrently proposing blocks or chunks with transactions in them, that participants or market makers that want to cancel their orders will be sure that they have the option to do that, and then they can get ahead of people that would otherwise take the other position or side of that trade. So for the sake of this presentation, we're going to assume you're interested in this, and that we're going to go from there, just because, with the time we have. So, why am I here? And that is simply to suggest a dumber way to do the same thing for those that need it now, and based on some simpler mechanism design. So for the last few years, I've been focused on a topic in the space called decoupled state machine replication. Now, the idea here, just a few big words that mean something very dumb, which is to say that unlike a traditional blockchain, which has what we call traditional SMR, you have someone that builds, then the block is replicated, then the block is verified, then the next person builds. This is Bitcoin, this is Ethereum, this is the way it's always been done. Solana introduced some big changes here with this notion of turbine and this what I'll call a streaming state machine replication to reduce the amount of, basically to safely have less latency in blocks. And you guys are, again, all familiar with that, so I'm not going to cover that. DSMR takes it a little bit further and says, instead of having one leader, what if everyone is a leader, and you build, replicate, and then verify each other's stuff, and then eventually find a way to stitch it together. Now, this is the problem statement for decoupled, which just means we decouple each step of the state machine replication process. So building does not, or replication does not have to happen directly after building, does not have to happen directly after verify. Now, my interest in this has actually been more from the throughput side. So the idea is that if you take advantage of everyone building at the same time and everyone is collecting transactions, you can drive a lot higher throughput. And you trade off a little bit of latency there because of the way that the blocks are eventually settled. But for a lot of applications, the additive throughput is really useful. Now, excuse me, where does multi-concurrent proposers differ? So the important part and the addition that is not inside of decoupled state machine replication is around this binding and blinding property, which is to say, we want to make sure that any validator that sends stuff out, when you're voting on other people, you don't quite know what it is until it's committed, so that you can't rip stuff out of it. And then at the same time, this notion of wall clock fairness, where people are proposing kind of at the same time to make sure that you get this ability to all participate in the same round or batch. And again, to pull a document from their blog post, you have multi-leader turbine, which is a proposal that they're working on, which has a way to do this where you use relay or turbine over relays, and then the shreds get inside of the consensus leader block, and then once you're committed to the chunks or references to chunks, then you can execute them. Now, You can then order the activity based on the chunk contents after things are completed. Now, the problem in DSMR, and the problem also with this like binding and blinding strategy, is that it leaves a lot of interesting doors open for people that want to play games or DOSing the system. And so a metric I often think about when evaluating these sort of decoupled state machine replication systems is how cost effectively can an adversarial user drive waste in the system. Because as soon as you separate the traditional like execution ordering and execution verification from what actually goes inside of a block, you end up with this game where you actually don't know when you sequence a transaction if it is going to be valid or not, or if it is already part of someone else's chunk. So the simplest thing, or before we get into that, quick model. So let's just say that you have this simple system, let's say 4 validators all accepting transactions, and then they can produce any number of chunks and send it out to the network. We'll consider like TPS as basically this block limit times concurrent leaders metric. So ideally every block or chunk has different transactions in it, and then it's full to the max, and so that should be your theoretical top line throughput. Now to get warmed up, let's consider a pretty basic attack, which is just like duplicate transactions, right? So if every chunk that's issued has the exact same transactions in it, your fee-paying transactions per second is just the block limit, not block limit times concurrent leaders. And then your wasted throughput is the block leaders times, or the block limit times concurrent leaders minus 1, which is basically all these chunks or blocks that have the exact same stuff in it. Now this is a pretty trivial attack, and the point of multi-concurrent proposers is for censorship resistance, and so this is accepted as a natural byproduct of that. But things get more interesting when you start to think about how asynchronous execution can impact safety here. So if you consider maybe a different case, what we'll call fund exhaustion, is that you have an account, and because you aren't quite executing things before you pack them, because you don't know what the state that you're building on is, what can happen is when you broadcast the transaction for a single account, that account in its first transaction may actually spend all of its balance, such that you won't actually be able to pull fees for the subsequent transactions, even though the transactions are valid and not duplicate. So in this case, let's say that in every chunk, there's a unique account, and the first transaction spends the entire balance. The entire block limit after that initial transaction will be wasted, AKA it's not fee paying. So the fee paying transactions per second is really here just a function of the concurrent leaders. Sorry, I packed like 25 slides into this 15-minute conversation. And so the invalid transactions per second becomes block limit minus 1 times the concurrent leaders. Now it gets gnarly when you combine the two. So if you do duplicate transactions and fund exhaustion, you can basically drive the fee-paying transactions down to more or less 1, or a function of how many unique accounts or how many transactions an account can submit in a block at one point in time. Now, the problem here is like, this is hard. It's asynchronous. Like as soon as that happens and you no longer have the ability to enforce that someone's paying fees, you open up a whole can of worms that, for a lot of theory reasons, is very difficult to resolve. And these are just some basic attacks, right? Like you can imagine all sorts of different games you can play as soon as you have this pre-sequence before execution where fees are not necessarily guaranteed to be charged. So what should we do? Well, in classic engineering fashion, we should do nothing. And is there a way that we can avoid solving this problem, really, is what we should be asking ourselves. And we think that there is. And we think that the line of reasoning to follow when thinking about how to get out of solving this problem is to see if we can sell this problem to somebody else. So at Commonware, we've been working on a project and a thing that we haven't shared yet called sequencer-driven decoupled state machine replication. And the simple idea here, and I was hoping that these words would be big enough, I'm hoping that they are, is that instead of having the block builder and validator and basically the users purchase capacity as needed from the block builder, you instead pre-sell network capacity on some iteration or epoch to a set of out-of-protocol sequencers. And the idea with these sequencers is that they're not actually providing any safety of any kind. Instead, what they're doing is they have the right to basically include some amount of capacity per unit of time, or let's say per block, and then they can choose to actually allocate that capacity however they feel like within their accounts that are actually on that sequencer. Now that phrase there is the key point. Accounts are allocated to exactly one sequencer at one point in time, such that there's only one person that's actually allowed to spend their fee balance. So you get away from all these problems, and then because an account can only go to one sequencer, you don't have any ability to do duplicate transaction submission to different sequencers. Now, the benefit for an application is if you are yourself a sequencer, which makes a lot of sense, you can determine ordering for your application, but also determine how to charge people for fees based on what they're doing. So maybe your power users you give away for free because they have some external benefit to the system. And then for other people, you charge in USDC or maybe Solana or whatever you want to. The point is that the sequencer is the one that maintains this fee-paying relationship with the network. And as a byproduct of that simplicity, you get away from all these issues. So how does this have anything to do with multi-concurrent proposers? Well, the trick is if you just tweak it a little bit, you can actually get something that looks very similar to multi-concurrent proposers, but is a lot simpler in terms of how you actually would construct it. And so the first thing that you would do is basically limit what can actually be a successful block, which includes these references from sequencers. And so you basically just say, hey, we need some M of n committees, certificates from sequencer broadcast to be included in a block for it to be considered valid. And then from there, you can basically leave it up to the or basically any account that wants to make sure they don't get censored to register on however many sequencers they feel is sufficient. And I think the way to make it feel more practical is if you think about maybe the way you typically submit a transaction today, which is through your wallet, through an RPC provider, maybe through an application. And the idea that they could have a deeper relationship with the customers that are actually using those products is something that we've heard time and time again is a very important thing to them. And so by solving all these problems, you end up thinking about the problem a different way, but giving a lot of the same techniques and hopefully the same properties. Now, is it perfect? Definitely not. Now, the idea with this system, right, is that you are, as an application or an account, bound to a single sequencer at some point in time. And so for some applications, like a application-focused blockchain construction, that may make a lot of sense, right? If you have a social network and you kind of easily separate between different sequencers. But for general computation, you end up having this reliance on these sequencers. Now, there are other ways to solve the problem, but they get pretty hairy because of the attacks that we talked about earlier. We think that this is a pretty good balance, and the really big benefit you get is that because these sequencers have this direct relationship with the users, they can also offer pre-commitments in a really safe way without actually occupying any safety from the network. So yeah, we're going to release a blog about this in the next few weeks, but this was thought it was a relevant topic to talk about given the blog posts that have come out lately. And yeah, what we're doing is we have 25 or so primitives for building product-driven blockchains that are available today, all in Rust across a number of different components. And then tomorrow, or actually Thursday, we're releasing a optimized version of Simplex, which is similar to some of the Alpenglow stuff, which may be interesting as an optimization direction as well for some of the research here. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.